G'day YouTube, Warbles on a lot here. Making a movie for VB Ed over there in Perth in response to a movie that Ed made about Americans and gun control. And Ed took a pretty forceful line, didn't you, Ed? Hey, how you going, mate? Mate, me old mate, the tax accountant fella who makes sure the government's going broke because no bastards paying their right tax, are they, Ed? Because of tax accountants. I guess Cory Brandis would really enjoy that, wouldn't he? He doesn't like anybody paying tax. That's why he's in the government, getting paid taxpayers' money. But anyway, Ed, getting back to this business of gun control and the Americans, I reckon it's got an awful lot to do with Godtheory and selfishness and a sense of entitlement. Now, I think I'm probably speaking from experience because I used to be a bit of a gun freak, you see, Ed. When I was about 2 or 3, one of my father's uncles gave me a BSA .177 calibre air rifle, which I wasn't actually allowed to use till I was 6. But that was when I was set up in the backyard, and my parents said, the problem is that when your mother washes the sheets and hangs them on the clothesline, the currawongs and the magpies go eating the cotoneaster berries off the bushes in all the gardens in the street, and then they go and sit on top of the clothesline and they shit the cotoneaster berries, and they run in streaks down the sheets. And they eat the figs and they eat the peaches, and they're not much good for the apple tree either. So here's this air rifle, and because you're so small, you'll have to lean it up against the fence and swing your whole weight with both hands off the cock and lever to compress the spring. And you're not allowed to shoot horizontally across leaning on a fence, because you might shoot one of the neighbours when they stand up in the garden. So I know what it's like to be raised as a gun nut. And I was deeply into it because I wanted to be a fighter pilot, and to be a fighter pilot it doesn't matter whether you can fly particularly well. And Red Baron used to write aeroplanes off all the time. First time he shot an aeroplane down, he landed in the paddock beside it and busted his own undercarriage. Looking for souvenirs he was, bloodthirsty prick. But anyway, the point is, to be a fighter pilot you had to be a crack shot. So I used to shoot any chance I got. I made brown Spanish onions locally extinct because my old man was the only bloke who'd been growing them since the 1930s. And every time the onion plant seeded, you'd get this thin little green stalk with like a great big round puffball. Perfect target for a kid, you know. You shoot it and you could shoot holes through the flower heads of his onions. And yeah, I shot out all his genetic material for making brown Spanish onions. And back in the day, I mean, when we got television, it was jam-packed full of old westerns, cowboy shoot-em-ups, World War II combat glorification movies. John Wayne was oozing out of every crevice and nook and cranny of the bloody American civilization that we in Australia were being force-fed. So I sort of understand the Gestalt consciousness that the Yanks have just kept on turbocharging all that time, you know. In 1967, my birthday present, and I fairly vividly remember this, was a camouflage set of little tiger suit sort of thing, jungle fatigues, and a plastic copy of an American combat hat, and a combat gun that had, it was virtually an M60 with a rocket launcher underneath it. And I remember it so well because I was terribly disappointed that might have been my 7th birthday, because we had a television and I'd seen these soldiers jumping off helicopters on the news every night in Vietnam. And when I jumped out of the apple tree wearing me combat hat with me combat suit with me combat gun, I landed on the ground and did a forward roll, and fucking plastic combat gun busted into 2 bits. I was pissed off. I was howling with rage. Most disappointing present I'd had since I was 3 years old, and I got a toy lawnmower. And it was a rainy Christmas, and the noise of it drove the parents bananas. You know, you turned the bloody wheel on the lawnmower and it had a little piece of spring steel against a cog, and it made clack, clack, clack noises to sound like the engine. So old man took it down to the shop. He was an engineer, and he got rid of the spring so that the lawnmower became silent. I took the lawnmower outside and pushed it around in the bloody grass on the first sunny day. And I had a major temper tantrum because, to quote me, apparently I said, the buddy ting won't mow. I expected the thing to actually cut the grass. I didn't realise it was a toy. Same thing with a combat gun that broke in half. The idea that it's acceptable to kill people that you haven't met because a politician said that your national honour depends on it, that's easy to sell to a 6-year-old. It's a very childish idea. It means the individual can delegate the moral responsibility for doing something that's really difficult, takes a lot of skill, and it can give you a measure of satisfaction if you do it skillfully enough. But it goes against all the religious teachings of all the major religions, which is thou shalt not kill. Right? So you have to have a particular view of God theory in order to justify the idea that it's okay to kill. And the initial cop-out is, oh, well, you know, I'm not killing for my own purposes, I'm killing for my country's purposes. Right? I mean, that's patently bullshit, you know. It makes as much sense to say that a group can, you know, collectively decide to go and shoot everybody in the neighbouring country as it does to say that the local ladies' CWA knitting club can decide to hold a vote on whether the, you know, bloke who mows the lawns at the town park should be shot because he's got one single eyebrow that runs right across his forehead, you know. He just doesn't look right. If it's not moral for the individual, it's not moral for the group. If it's not moral for one person to torture another person, it's not moral for a nation to torture one person. So you have to either take the view that your God theory is powerless and you can get away with whatever you want, and therefore everybody else can get away with whatever they want, and thus and because the only way for you to be safe is if you have the power to kill anything which may appear within your visual horizon of which you may be frightened. Okay? If you take the view that your God theory is so fucking useless that you might be walking along and all of a sudden, out of nowhere for no reason at all, a hostile entity will approach you and you will need to kill them before they get a chance to kill you, then if your God theory is that piss weak, the only way out of it is to carry deadly force on you all the time and be prepared to use it. Now, I read an article in a magazine just after I gave up being a gun nut, I think it must have been. Yeah, probably 5 years after I gave up being a gun nut. And the article was about a thing called the speed rock. And it described a method of wearing your gun there's a handgun, in a holster, and practicing a fast draw which involved the person leaning backwards, and as they leaned backwards, the radius between their shoulder and the holster changed, and their hands sort of pulled the gun out of the holster, and they were ready to fire before virtually as the muzzle cleared the holster, and the gun was fired at an extraordinary low level down on their leg. Just chewing on a cough lolly there. Kind of getting over an upper respiratory tract infection, either that or some smoke inhalation from the fires I was doing last week. But anyway, turns out that this particular bloke served legal papers for a living in America. And he lived in perpetual fear that one day he was going to open the door or knock on the door and somebody would open the door and stick a shotgun in his face. So he practiced in front of a mirror in all his spare time, rocking backwards and pulling a gun out of his holster and dry firing at the mirror. And one day he finally got his chance, you know, and he was writing the magazine article explaining the benefits of practising the speed rock, because the day he went to serve papers on a outlaw motorcyclist or some other nefarious character, the door opened, and behind the screen door he saw there was the shotgun that he was dreaming about for years, and he managed to shoot the fella dead within about a quarter of a second flat. And he lived on that perpetual knife edge of paranoid persecution fantasy for probably 15 years before he finally got his fantasy fed to him, because by the feedback loops in the cosmic scoreboard effect, you've got to be careful what you pray for, because eventually you're going to get it. You know, in the same way, when I was 6 years old, I prayed for a chance to fly First World War aeroplanes and hang out in the breeze, you know, helmet and goggles and leather silk scarf, fur-lined boots. And by the time I was 17, I was scraping the paint off a fabric-covered tiger moth, and I wound up with an early ultralight as pay, and I got to sit in an aeroplane that was so primitive it didn't have, you know, a cockpit to sit in. You were just sitting on a seat hanging under the wing. You know, it took me 10 or 11 years of praying for an early aeroplane before I got one fed to me as a teenager. This fella spent 15 years praying for a shotgun in the face when he had a door opened. And he finally got one, and he killed the bloke with a shotgun. I wonder how he sleeps afterwards. So, the Americans, apparently, most of them, they have very, very, very powerless God theories. There's a whole lot of them who spend a lot of time going to church 1, 2, 5, 6 days a week, 7 days a week perhaps, talking about their God theories, arguing about their God theories, singing about them, dancing about them, donating money to the preachers who's out there, you know, doing terrible things with the choir boys or whatever. But none of them, well, can't say none of them, but a hell of a lot of them seem to think that their God theory is not going to be able to keep them safe. So they're not going to be able to avoid being mugged, therefore they have to prepare to shoot muggers. They'd rather shoot somebody than give them their wallet. Shit, it's a bit of an inconvenience. You can get a new wallet. But anyway, yeah, that's the thing, Ed. The Americans are a long way down a very, very self-centred, self-entitled track where each one of them honestly believes that they have the right to feel absolutely safe from any form of persecution or danger that they can imagine. They have a law over there, in some states, not all, that says not a step back. So if you're walking down the road and you see someone coming towards you who you feel is frightening, doesn't matter what they're actually thinking about, you take one look at them and you're terrified of them. If you feel like you're going to have to step backwards or get out of their way because you're scared of what they might do, well, Ed, in America you're allowed to fucking shoot them because they scared you. The not one step back law. All because the gun-crazy Americans do not have a God theory that's worth a pinch of shit to the compost heap. And it ain't just the Americans who have got such deficient God theories. There's Muslims all over the world who are polishing their bloody AK-47s right now. There's Buddhists who go into battle with a Buddha on a chain around their neck, little plastic Buddha often, in their mouth, so they've got a better chance at getting through the gates of paradise. Strange and twisted Buddhists, you find them in Cambodia. They also eat steaming hot slices out of a liver of any battle casualty who displayed particular bravery during the combat. Dividing up and sharing the spoils of the brave individual in the hope that the spirit of their bravery can be consumed and added to your own bravery for the next encounter. Yeah, mate, gun theory and God theory are inextricably entwined. If you've got a God theory worth a pinch of shit to the compost heap, you would not dare to think that you needed a gun, because that would be insulting to your God theory. Fuck, Ed, that would be like going into church and intoning a prayer that says you believe in one God the Father, the Almighty, the maker of heaven and earth, of all things seen and unseen, and then taking up a collection to pay the insurance premium for the policy to cover the church roof in case a fucking lightning bolt in a thunderstorm that your all-powerful God theory can't steer takes the roof off the church. That would be blasphemy, wouldn't it? So when you see these Americans thumping the tub, blowing the horn, waving the flag, talking about how God-fearing they are while they're polishing a gun with the other hand, you can see there's a deep-seated persecution fantasy in there. It's like they've got an ancestral guilt built into them, and I think really it's because they expect somebody to come and shoot them up and chase them off their patch and take all their stuff. It is built into the American Gestalt consciousness and their psyche to expect that somebody is going to want to do it to them, because that is how the contemporary existing culture and government and society that runs the excited states of Norte Armed Americano, that's how they fucking got their head. They turned up and they gave blankets with smallpox to the Indians, and they shot them for a century. Isn't that right, mate? The reason the American culture is so fucking convinced that they're being stalked and hunted and persecuted by poor people all around the world is because they know they stole the land. It's the same knee-jerk reaction that Australians have got to anybody who's coming here in a boat hoping to live here. That's how white Australia got here. We know how fucking easy it is for boat people to steal the continent from the people who are already living here. And what our government is determined to do is sink the boats or turn them back to Indonesia and sell the country to China. Think it through, Ed. The Americans are gun crazy because they're terrified that somebody is going to do to them what their ancestors did to the people who used to live there. And that is shoot the pricks who have the land but don't have guns. It's an ancestral guilt trip. And until they grow up and stop being so fucking childish and stop acting like, the 6-year-old that thinks that he can dress up in a combat suit from the toy shop and jump out of an apple tree and be just like the blokes on the helicopters in Vietnam on TV, when the Yankees grow up, then they won't want to cling to their guns, and they might maybe perhaps trust that the God theory will keep the scared, selfish people away from the people who are not scared and not selfish and not trying to, take everything they can get. How great art thou, God theory? If you've got a God theory that's not worth a pinch of shit to the compost heap, then you will find the possession of a gun greatly comforting, because you can think of a million instances and circumstances and possibilities where your God theory might fucking fail you, and that's why you want to have a gun. You're the bloke who's saying, oh, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of the shattered streetlights, I shall fear no evil, because the Police Commissioner has forced the taxpayers to purchase for me a fucking Kevlar flak jacket and a 16-shot semi-automatic sidearm with 3 spare magazines and a taser and a can of capsicane and a collapsible baton and a radio linked back to the base station, and I've probably even got a patrol car nearby with a buddy, and we can stand back to back should anything dangerous come out to us in the valley of the shadow of the shattered streetlights, because the vandals are wicked, mate. That's the big fantasy in America. It's been pumped into them at really, really high pressure since the paperback penny dreadful Western novels and detective novels started being pushed. Something to provide an exciting diversion from working long, boring hours in a factory. Once you teach the proletariat to read, you have to give them something to excite their fantasy. Divert it away from rebellious thoughts like better working conditions, safer working conditions, more pay, maybe some holiday pay, something like that. No. Read about Wyatt Earp, gunfight at the OK Corral, stuff like that. The Lone Stranger. Yeah, it's built into their culture, mate. It's the same kind of overcompensated inferiority complex on turbocharged steroids that you see when somebody who's got a 3.5-inch erection insists on driving a fucking 8-litre V12 turbocharged speed machine, painted bright red, so everybody will see what a great big man he is by controlling such powerful machinery. My opinion, anyway. And us ranting about the Americans needing to control their guns in some form other than preparing for the recoil, it's not going to change. The Americans will achieve gun control, Eddie, when the last 2 violently doubtful warrior atheists fighting for control of the last can of dog food in the burnt-out remains of where the final supermarket used to be, when they hear each other scrabbling around in the aisles and they pop up behind the festering, rotting remains of the bin freezer and they head shoot each other. And when the last 2 fucking gun nuts have turned each other simultaneously into compost by the serendipity of the coincidence of the synchronicity, that's when all the pacifists and the vegetarians will come out from their hidey holes and the meek will have inherited the earth, just as it was foretold on the Sermon on the Mount, and the vegetarians will grow their food in the rotting remains of the warriors. You see, we're part of a selective breeding program to come up with a pacifist strain of vegetarians, thinly spread, all over the world. It's how it seems to me. Everybody in the world could wake up to themselves tomorrow and say, oh, fuck, I don't want to be a dickhead anymore. I'll stop trying to be a high consumption consumer, a conspicuous consumer. I'll stop trying to eat and consume as much as I can. I'll stop trying to prepare to fight to the death by surprise at any moment. And I'll get on with trying to raise the next generation not to live like fuckwits. Everybody in the world could wake up tomorrow and make those 3 decisions. And I guarantee just about every human-induced problem in the world would be greatly ameliorated, if not rendered much closer to being solvable. We'd still have to put up with probably 3 or 4 degrees of global warming because we're not going to fucking stop it at 2. Not the way we're going. Not unless solar flare, electromagnetic pulse. Maybe the ISIS people will catch camel fuckers disease. I mean, Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome. Ebola's still on the loose. You know, there's lots of things that could give us a pretty decent cataclysm. Perhaps the Israelis will decide that, you know, it's everybody else's fault and they'll nuke all the fucking Arab countries surrounding them and the Middle Eastern oil will come out of the market and the whole thing will shrink and fall to pieces. But, no, it's all going to get worse. The Americans are just going to keep getting nastier and nastier to each other until they balkanise. And don't forget, in the excited states, I'm pretty sure the state governors command the National Guard, although maybe Obama changed that with the military administration bill that went through just after he came in. But yeah, the National Guard in America, they have jet fighters and artillery and tanks. You know, if one state governor decides that he doesn't want to obey Washington because he's Republican and they're Democrat, America could go very Serbian, very fast. And nobody can make anybody else give up their gun, really. I decided to give up my guns, and I got rid of nearly all of them, and I clung on to 1 or 2 for just sort of sentimental reasons, and then after I pretty much stopped using guns, then I got into a bit of legal paperwork that meant I had to give up my shooter's licence, and I haven't had a shooter's licence for over 20 years. And the idea of getting a gun and making bang bang noises on my place and losing all the friendliness that I have with the wildlife is just unthinkable. So I wouldn't ever go back to having a gun because I haven't got any need for one. I've got no use for one. I'm a vegetarian, so I don't want to shoot anything to eat it. And I expect the creator of the universe to keep me safe from anybody who wants to kill somebody for the fun of it, and I haven't got anything pretty much worth stealing because I've been living on the smell of a greasy rag for 25 years. So I'm pretty much outside the crime loop. Yeah, the whole self-defensive fantasy, overcompensated inferiority complex of a cowardly atheist. A cowardly behavioural atheist. That's really where you get to for the self-defensive fantasy. So that's my thoughts on guns and God theory and selfishness and entitlement. Ed, hope it makes some sense to you. And I haven't seen your video on the budgie smuggling wingnut yet, but because you watch my videos and I like watching your videos, I guess I'll just go and have to see what you've got to say about that bloke you voted for. Warbles on a lot to YouTube. See you, Ed. Ciao.